Last week, former US President George W. Bush traveled to Canada to deliver an address to an economic forum. Now, concerned Canadian citizens are asking why their country is one of the few on the planet that refuses to prosecute Bush for war crimes. This is the GRTV Backgrounder. Welcome. This is James Corbett of Global Research TV at grtv.ca. Human rights groups, civil rights campaigners, and concerned citizens united in their condemnation of the visit of former US President George W. Bush to Canada last week for a speaking engagement in Surrey, British Columbia. Bush's visit rekindled debates among Canadians about their government's willingness to host an unconvicted war criminal who is guilty of authorizing torture in contravention of numerous international treaties and the laws of his own country. Preparations for the visit have been underway for weeks, with Amnesty International sending a memorandum to the Canadian government in September outlining the grounds for arresting and prosecuting Bush for war crimes, and the Canadian group Lawyers Against the War having drafted a similar document for the Prime Minister back in August, when the engagement was first announced. The Lawyers Against the War document cites Bush's aiding and abetting of torture at Guantanamo Bay, Abu Ghraib, Bagram, and other locations as the legal basis for refusing him entry to Canada under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. As evidence of that torture, the memo cites a 2006 UN report, a 2007 Council of Europe report, a 2008 US Senate Armed Services Committee report, the testimony of UN Special Rapporteurs Manfred Nowak and Martin Scheinin, a 2009 admission by Bush's Vice President Dick Cheney, and Bush's own 2010 memoirs, in which he admitted to authorizing torture techniques such as waterboarding. Perhaps the most blatant admission of torture came from Bush's own mouth in November of 2010, when the Times of London asked whether the use of waterboarding by his administration had been justified. "Damn right," Bush replied. 3 people were waterboarded, and I believe that decision saved lives. Despite the copious evidence, testimony, and even first-hand admissions that the Bush regime was guilty of war crimes, however, Bush's speech went ahead as scheduled. The event was well attended by protesters demonstrating their unhappiness with the Canadian government's decision to allow Bush into the country. This was in fact not President Bush's first visit to Canada since leaving office. Earlier this month, Vancouver also played host to Bush's former Vice President Dick Cheney, who was greeted by an even more raucous group of protesters.
This is a dark day for Canada. In 2000, the Canadian Parliament passed a statute, the Canadian Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act. And that states that Canada is not to be a haven, not to give refuge for war criminals. In my view, the most obvious, notorious war criminal, or credibly accused war criminal, because he hasn't had a trial yet, is Dick Cheney.
Not only did he lie to go to war, his lies leading to 1 million deaths, but he's self-confessed torturers.
Cheney! Cheney!
Don't you think that buying tickets to this event is aiding and abetting a war criminal? Does that not make sense to you?
Are you aiding and abetting a war criminal by going in?
You don't think so? You disagree with that? You don't think that that's aiding and abetting?
Are you having fun now?
You don't think that that is aiding and... I'm asking you a serious question.
Yeah.
And you can't answer.
The door's over here, sir. The door's over here.
I'm what? I'm intelligent enough to know what I'm speaking about, sir. You're...
In 2009, Bush made his first trip abroad after departing the White House to deliver a speech at the TELUS Convention Centre in downtown Calgary, Alberta. There, too, his visit was mired in controversy, with Lawyers Against the War and other groups calling at that time for Bush to be banned from entering the country or arrested for his involvement in war crimes. The Calgary speech was likewise the scene of vigorous protests, with one protester, splitting the sky, being wrestled to the ground and arrested when trying to enter the venue to commit a citizen's arrest of Bush.
You have got to, we have asked you as representatives of the people to arrest this man. We're asking you to arrest him now. I'm not touching him.
I had the chance to interview Splitting the Sky earlier this week about these attempts to bring George W. Bush to justice and what the failure of the Government of Canada to act says about Canada's role in international relations.
When George Bush came here with Bill Clinton, we once again had Gail Davison from the Lawyers Against War, and this time we had the Center for Constitutional Rights calling for his arrest. We had the opposition from the NDP party calling for his arrest on Parliament Hill. I then found out, as we were pressing, and all of the work that we've been doing to mobilize over these last couple of years, all of the, and I'm talking about major grassroots organizing, just in May of this year, we were at Surrey, BC to launch the campaign, and we passed out 20,000 flyers, as well as about 1,000 posters posted up all around, and we've been on Facebook to the point between the Lawyers Against War, Gail Davison, Center for Constitutional Rights. We then got a major endorsement from Amnesty International, which put out a call for the arrest of George Bush when he got to Canada. And then we called on some of the people that were tortured by the Bush administration in Guantanamo Bay, and they're now calling for his arrest because they want to sue Bush administration. So by this time, we came with hundreds more people showing up in Surrey, BC, in front of the Sheraton Hotel at this bogus economic conference. There were hundreds of cops out there, the same military. There was a lot of military snipers up on top of the rooftops, helicopters flying around. We never did get to see them. There was a number of people that wanted to break the line, but and I thought, well, maybe I would have to do it again, but you can't do everything all the time. I set the example, and I got to let the next wave man take over, because certainly if I had done it a second time, the punishment would be 5 times more severe than it was.
So perhaps you can just speak to what does this say about Canada? Because as I understand it, Canada is one of the only places that Bush and Cheney will dare to visit anymore, because so many other countries have decided that they will do their duty in upholding the charges for war crimes that are so obvious and have been presented by so many respected lawyers around the world. And of course, we saw Bush cancel a visit to Switzerland last year because he was afraid of being arrested. Yet they travel in and out of Canada with total impunity. What does that mean about Canada and the Canadian government?
Well, what it says is that finally the world no longer sees Canada as a peaceful humanitarian country that we used to be here. Canada, especially under the Harper regime, and since post the free trade agreements of the Mulroney era, Canada has degraded itself to the point of becoming economic serfs of the United States interest, and especially the U.S. interest of foreign policies. So the United States is under the Harper regime and basically went gung-ho again under the auspices of fighting terrorism internationally. Canada signed up with the Coalition of the Willing, backed the United States interest in Iraq, and also backed the U.S. interest in Afghanistan, and provided the Joint Task Force 2 special forces to arrest and detain suspected al-Qaeda terrorists, and then sent them off to these black sites to be tortured. So Canada is complicit in the war crimes.
Bush has had to be careful about his overseas travel since leaving office, as numerous countries have indicated that they would be unable or unwilling to shield him from war crimes charges when visiting their country. Earlier this year, a planned Bush trip to Switzerland to attend a gala for a Jewish charity was called off when a mass campaign by human rights groups put mounting pressure on Swiss authorities to arrest him during his trip.
And former President Bush has canceled a trip to Switzerland. He was scheduled to go on Saturday to speak. However, there was a group there called the Center for Constitutional Rights that says it was prepared to file a legal complaint against the former president if he went to Switzerland. They also want him to be prosecuted for, quote, approving torture of terror suspects.
This gives Canada the dubious distinction of being one of the few countries willing to host a visit by an acknowledged war criminal. Now, concerned citizens are seeking answers from their elected officials about how an admitted torturer and war criminal would be allowed into the country to deliver a $150,000 address. When asked to justify her part in allowing the Bush speech to proceed, Surrey councillor Judy Villeneuve had this to say.
You have a history of being involved in various progressive causes in Surrey. What goes through your mind when you see protesters accusing the city of Surrey of hosting a war criminal?
Charlie, I understand and appreciate those opinions, and I have to say that I've been part of those discussions in my life as well. But as I was saying to Matt, I also worked for 23 years with the Writers' Union of Canada, and I really believe, particularly in this day and age, about the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression. I think it's really good that we learn to be thinking individuals and we're able to sort right from wrong. And I think many of us have some feelings about some of the participants today, but I'm willing to listen, but I'm also willing to make sure that I'm broad-minded enough to make a judgment that's going to be in the best interest of my, hopefully, future decisions on council.
It is unclear, however, how freedom of speech can be invoked as a defense from prosecution of war crimes. For now, the Canadian government continues to act on its own arbitrary set of rules for allowing or denying people into the country, apparently happy to side with an admitted torturer and war criminal against the wishes of the vast majority of its citizens. For more on this story and other breaking news and current events, please go to globalresearch.ca. For more research and analysis by James Corbett, please go to corbettreport.com.